All right, guys. So I have previously done an episode on quantum with one of our mutual friends, Reardon, who's much more on the skeptic side. Today, I am bringing on somebody who is actively working on, I would say, the other side. I'm not sure that's exactly how to frame it, but somebody who's working on solutions for post-quantum cryptography and is very much in the camp that quantum is coming, I assume, and that we need to be prepared. So to that end, Tyler, welcome. Give us a little bit of your background just for context, and we'll dive in.
Thanks, Court. Yeah, I'm stoked to be here. My background is, so actually I studied physics and math in undergrad. So I took like 2 years of quantum mechanics. I love physics. I worked on fusion reactors. I was like, actually, fusion is the future of energy. Here we are now, 20 years later, it's still 20 years away, but I do think that's getting better. That is an aside though, ended up doing a PhD in organizations and entrepreneurship, which was a hard pivot away. And then found my way to blockchains because, well, they were just kind of the culmination of everything I had studied. It was like I'd studied finance, I'd studied organizations, I'd studied physics and math, and you just got to do all of that in crypto. So I was like, this place is amazing. So got nerd sniped into crypto via DAOs, actually, because I was wrapping up my PhD and everyone was like, we're reinventing the organization on chain. And I was like, oh, all right, sweet. Like, I love this energy. I'm skeptic about this, but whatever. So that's why my Twitter name is Dr. DAO.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
How'd you get it?
How many successful DAOs are there? I think like maybe Bitcoin, although Bitcoin's kind of failing as a DAO these days. And then fell down like the ZK rabbit hole, was working at the Taproot Wizards the past 2 years, kind of pushing on how can we scale Bitcoin, all of those things. And then actually I can claim at least one thing while I was there, which is naming the quantum cats. Okay. I love quantum. Like I love physics. I think it's fascinating. I just wasn't smart enough to do a PhD in that subject. And so when we were coming up with the quantum cats, it was like, great. Like one of the things this can do is we can do these things called Lamport signatures, which are quantum resistant. Like this is great. Cat is post-quantum. Like let's call them the quantum cats. Nice. And then like a month or two later, everyone realizes like, oh fuck, like, Taproot is not actually quantum resistant and cat's only going into Taproot addresses. So actually, psych, like putting cat in does not make Bitcoin quantum resistant. I think we need to do more. But that has always been like a passion of mine within crypto. And so actually, this is probably almost like a year and a half ago or something, when Project 11 was just getting started. I got a call from my friend Lior, who I worked with in VC before I joined the Taproot Wizards, and he now has his own fund. And he was like, I want to start a company around the idea that quantum computing is coming on timelines faster than people think. I've been talking with a bunch of physicists. Like, I'm convinced people are mispricing this risk, and I want to get something started here. And this was the time I was out there, promoting OpCat and all of these things. And I was like, this is a really cool idea. I feel like it needs, it's not time for that narrative right now, because the narrative right now is scaling Bitcoin. But I want to tell me more, like, how can I help? I want to be involved. And so I've actually known, the Project 11 team since its inception. I was advising them. I basically just got moved up on the website from advisor to team member in the past few weeks. Thank you. And so as the quantum narrative, as I felt the pull of the quantum narrative more and more, I just couldn't resist kind of moving over to that side and pushing that forward, because it is just this thing that sits at an intersection of, multiple passions of mine. I don't know, physics plus blockchains. I love both those things so much. And so being able to work, smack in the middle of those two, it just gets me jazzed and gets me up in the morning. So now I joined Project 11 full time about a month ago. I'm leading their product org. We should have some good stuff coming down the pipeline here in the next few months. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about kind of the vision for the company as well, of just moving blockchains into the post-quantum, but even quantum future. So
okay, so I know you are, I wouldn't say building in stealth, but you haven't announced everything yet. So you said beforehand that obviously some of this will come out later. But give me an overview of Project 11. What is the kind of premise to the extent that you can talk about it.
Yeah. So the premise of Project 11 was, it was what I kind of mentioned in the intro. It's like, we think quantum computing is coming faster than most people believe. If that is the case, like if we're living in that future, what do we need to be doing today in order to secure the entire digital asset space in this new world? And the big challenge for, our industry is that there is no CEO who can go and say like, hey, you're using MLDSA or you're using Falcon signatures and like go put those in all of our stuff now. Like if you don't do it, you're fired. Cool. Like that will still take organizations a very long time because there's just so many dependencies if you want to actually get out all of this classical cryptography from your systems. And so you see companies like Cloudflare have started doing this today, where like 35% of traffic sent through Cloudflare now is actually done with a post-quantum like handshake. So like post-quantum TLS, basically. And that's for a company that has a CEO that can fire people if they don't do what they want to do. Within blockchains, we have this additional level. We don't just have the execution challenge, but we also have the coordination challenge. So how do we actually coordinate around what these changes are? Who are the people in charge of kind of like making these changes? And, when and what are those changes going to be? And so Project 11's goal is to basically be the, our CEO, Alex, likes to use the term vanguard, so I'll use it. The vanguard for, moving blockchains into the post-quantum era. And on a more, tactical level, for me, what that means is pragmatically producing products and services that consumers can use today to protect themselves from post-quantum. It means working and researching on, post-quantum standards and how, we can build better standards that work well for blockchains. And then it also means, being parts of the conversations with these blockchains, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana, about how we can help assist that push forward.
Okay. So, and again, I know a lot of this will be coming out. What is the business case for Project 11? Before we go, we're going to go much more to quantum in a second, but what is the business case? Like, yes, you can upgrade a lot of these systems, but you just raised money, right? Like the intention, obviously, in the future is to make money. What is like sort of the business case here?
So I think it's kind of what I talked about before. It's both consumer and like technical services business. I think at the end of the day, our goal will be to be pulling these blockchains in the future. So like I want to be the gateway for consumers to get into the post-quantum future. And if we are kind of the gateway or the bridge that all, like things must flow through in order to get and become post-quantum, then I feel confident there's a very good business case there for how we can capture value along that way.
So let me ask, is this, if you had to, would you consider yourself more of a consulting organization, or would you consider yourself more of a B2B SaaS, or some combo of both? But if you had to choose,
I think it's probably more like the consulting and B2B SaaS, in my mind, are ways to help push along this consumer flywheel, right? So if we can take a blockchain and move it and like write the post-quantum implementation of it, I think that is a very powerful flywheel. And then I think if we have consumer products out there that just naturally plug into this new blockchain, then this is like a very natural, like imagine we have like you put all of your, assets in some consumer products we have. And as soon as this new post-quantum Ethereum or post-quantum Solana or whatever comes online, like you're immediately plugged into this, connected to it, and you can transact like you're there. So basically, like, can we build that consumer substrate that people recognize as post-quantum secure? And then can we then start layering on top of that, the actual chains and things you want to interact with?
Okay, got it. Okay, so then let's just dive right into, well, what is it in the past? Well, okay, so obviously, in terms of hype and sort of focus, the quantum discussion has really come about, I would say, in the last 3 months, like at least insofar as Twitter and then, broader conversation. Now, this conversation has been going on for 5, 10, decades. And in fact, like Satoshi has, recognized this, I think, at least in conversation on forums with people as, potentially being a threat in the future. So like this has been an idea that has been around for quite some time. As of late, it has gained much more traction, I think, in part Nick Carter writing about it, and then sort of the subsequent, discussions from there. What is it as of, the past 3 months? Like there's insane exponential growth in AI. Are we sort of extrapolating to some extent and saying like this is reasonable to think that quantum is going to follow a similar path? Like just start rambling. I rambled, you can ramble now.
Yeah. Yes. I think there's been a few things that have happened that just lead me to believe that we're like approaching an inflection point in how quickly we can start, executing on quantum computers. I think the big one last year was Google's Willow, basically showing like, hey, a big issue with quantum computers is this idea of error correction. And it's like, these things are noisy, and how do we get the noise out of the system? And up until last year, like adding more bits to the system increased the noise. Right. And what Google's Willow, paper essentially said is actually we found a way that when you layer on more bits, it's actually going to reduce the noise. And that was like, oh, crap, like this, this is a breakthrough that moves us into a new regime where now, like, in theory, and I will say that, like, in theory, we can build these systems in such a way that now larger systems are not actually causing exponential blow up in issues there. That to me was the big one from last year, if there's like one takeaway there. The things I'm excited about for this year are like improvements in algorithms. I know like Shor's algorithm is known as it's like the thing that breaks classical cryptography. So for listeners who aren't familiar at all with quantum computing, maybe I'll start there with the idea with quantum computing is it's basically a new computing paradigm or regime. So in classical computers, we have bits that are 0 or 1. Like they are one or the other. They definitely cannot be both. In quantum computing, we use these weird things called qubits, which can be 0, 1, or a combination of the two. And when you have these new types of bits, you can solve new types of problems. And one of the problems that we can solve with qubits is basically it's like a factoring algorithm. And this reduces down to something called the hidden subgroup problem. If you're like a math nerd and want to go down the rabbit hole, like go Google that. But the TLDR is that this hidden subgroup problem can be solved with a quantum computer. It can't be solved with a classical computer. And the hidden subgroup problem is what underpins all of our cryptography in blockchains today. So if you have Bitcoin and you're like, not my keys, not my coin, like that's what everyone says. Well, in the quantum computing era, it's kind of like your keys, my coins, if I have a quantum computer, right? So it does not matter whether, you're thinking, oh, I own my keys. Well, now if I have a quantum computer, I can also own your keys because I can solve this problem that underpins the thing that allows you to spend your Bitcoin. That is the risk that quantum computers pose to our space. So I think maybe like starting there is good. And then the question is, okay, given this risk, how far away are we from the moment where a quantum computer does come along and, Satoshi's coins start moving, right? And people go, well, either Satoshi has decided it's time to floor my Bitcoin, or someone has built Yeah.
I love that. Go on.
It's
mass list at floor price.
Exactly. It's appropriate for today's
Yeah.
conversation, I think. But yeah, this comes along and you can imagine Satoshi's coins move. And then you have to ask yourself, well, does this mean someone has managed to build a sufficiently powerful quantum computer such that they've been able to figure out the secret keys for Satoshi's coins and now they're spending them? That is like the risk we want to head off. There's a fun, like, if I'm going to ramble, there's also, our friend Reardon, who thinks quantum computers are scams, but actually, and I respect Reardon a lot, and he's a very sharp guy, feels more confident that AGI is going to actually solve this hidden subgroup problem using classical computers. And so it doesn't actually matter how the cryptography gets broken for a system like Bitcoin. It just matters that we have alternative options for the cryptography we use to secure our keys. And if we have that, then it makes it, much easier to say, okay, we call this crypto agility, right? You can easily substitute in one signing algorithm for another. And now we're no longer really too worried. We're definitely still worried, and Bitcoin itself should be like that. That's a can of worms we can go down. But, in theory, you could imagine everyone has a wallet and they click a button and it says like move from classical signing to post-quantum signing. And then who knows, like quantum computer breaks the quantum signing and there's another algorithm that we think we can move, and everyone just clicks a button and it's like move from, current post-quantum signing, quantum signing algorithm 1 to algorithm 2. Like, now the system is no longer, purely dependent on the underlying cryptography, because we have the ability to flex in new cryptography as needed.
You and Reardon, for example, like, I think you guys can have a very constructive conversation, and oftentimes this stuff doesn't come out necessarily in public, which, okay, there's, pros and cons to this, but the fact of the matter is I think that, well, it's just good to see that there's like conversation where it's not like I hate you as a person, and you see this a lot on the timeline where you don't like someone's bags and like it becomes very personal. It's like, dude, like, you run into this a lot. So anyways, on that note, I did have this conversation with Reardon and I posed him this same question, which I'm about to ask you. I find quantum to be, interestingly, it is probably to me the biggest disconnect for normies, but also not just normies, people like myself who aren't extremely technical, but like I try to pay attention. Quantum seems something where there's, at least for the time being, a ton of hype, a ton of mania. People are, encouraging us to move fast. People are even speculating that coins are being dumped because people are afraid of this. And yet, from my research, and also I'm kind of going off of Reardon here, the progress thus far seems like relatively low to the amount of hype. And so, like, you brought up the Willow chip, for example. What explains this disconnect? Like, everyone's screeching, and I'm over here like, I don't want to lose all my coins, right? But at the same time, I'm like, wait, why can't it factor 21, right? Like, that's the common refrain. Yeah. Like, well, why doesn't a quantum computer factor 21?
Yeah, I think so. In my mind, some of the disconnect is around how you price this risk of something coming along quickly. So if we look at the slope of AI improvements since the, all you need is attention paper, I don't think people were really capable of imagining where we are today based off of like that one, like Transformers, like these are interesting. Yeah. Like, I wonder what these can do. Fast forward like 4 years later when, O1 comes out, and that was like that was a paradigm shift. That was a literal like paradigm shift in how work was done, how like so many things changed, and the pace of that change was all spurred by this kind of like these fundamental updates and changes. I think Willow is like an example of this, and I think in the next year or two we're going to see that attention is all you need paper for quantum. And that is basically gonna say like the race has started, and once the race starts and once that cat is out of the bag, the challenge is okay, it would be great if everyone realizes this is the attention is all you need paper. But people didn't realize the attention was all you need paper was what it was, right? Until a few years later. And so in that intervening time, like all this stuff happens and O1 comes out and O1 comes out and people are like, wow, this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. Well, the equivalent of O1 coming out for the blockchain or crypto industry is everyone's coins are fucked. The industry like has to move everything. And part of me is like, why, as an investor, like not as someone who loves blockchains and physics and all this stuff, as an investor, why on earth would I keep my money in these systems that their whole thing was security and like ownership and, you know, distributed ownership, be a self-sovereign person. And now that narrative just got one-shotted by someone spinning Satoshi's coins.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I'm going to peace out from here for the next like 5 to 10 years. Y'all can try and figure out like post-quantum stuff and maybe bring this back. But from a like entire, like we're looking at the entire universe of everything here. Why am I wanting to invest in this system that said it's so amazing, it's decentralized, it's all of these things? But what it's actually shown me is it can't coordinate and upgrade and actually respond to these existential threats to it.
Yeah.
And that to me is the risk that's like not properly like, I know people are like, we don't need to move today. But when I look at quantum, I'm like, this is the thing that could one shot our industry, and saying like, it's not coming and we're going to put our heads in the sand. I think I can't tell you with certainty a quantum computer is coming in the next 5 years, but I also can't tell you with certainty that a quantum computer spinning Satoshi's coins is not coming in the next 5 years. And so my question is like, given that, you know, what risk level, how certain are you? How certain is everyone that this won't happen? And that to me is the way to frame this question is like, if you thought there was a 1% chance that this would happen in the next 5 years, is the answer like, no worries, guys, like, let's just like ignore this until some more information comes out and comes along? I think the answer is no. And it's exactly because of what we talked about earlier. It's not just the execution, it's the coordination around the execution and these timelines where there is a very painful scenario for blockchains, which is quantum computers start spending people's tokens.
Let me take a moment to talk to you about Ellipsis Labs, a team I've known for a while. The Ellipsis team is one of the few that I consistently point to and say, these guys really know what they're doing. Ellipsis Labs brought capital-efficient order books to Solana and started the Prop AMM revolution with SolFi. Altogether, they've saved retail traders tens of millions of dollars by reducing slippage on spot markets. They're bringing the same level of expertise to perpetuals with Phoenix, which is live today. Ellipsis Labs is backed by Paradigm, Electric Capital, and Han Ventures. I would consider them the foremost experts in crypto market microstructure. The best part is that Ellipsis Labs is hiring for New York-based engineers. Work with a small, focused team who are results-driven, collaborative, and use a modern stack. If you're an engineer with a DeFi team that's already proven itself in the market, go to ellipsislabs.xyz/careers. Okay, so here's something that I have heard, and I'm also like pontificating right now, so tell me if this does not sound correct at all, but the ChatGPT moment was real. I agree. And I also think that, yeah, it was hard to imagine 4 years later we'd be where we are. I think that's true. Also, you could look at this slightly differently and say that, you know, Eliezer thought that by now we would be in the singularity. So maybe that's not that's kind of not apples to apples. You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to make that argument, but I'm just suggesting that there were like many potential outcomes with the kind of advent of like LLMs and or the practical implementation of LLMs into where we are today. So look, I'm not denying any like the exponential growth. I'm in agreement with you there. Yeah. What I would say though is like humans tend to innovate sort of in a staggered way, in the sense that some things do see exponential growth at times, and there are also things that simply have not seen exponential growth for quite some time. And oftentimes, I'm being very I'm generalizing here, oftentimes those tend to be more in what we consider meat space or physical space. Mm-hmm. And I think quantum is some sort of in between of physical and digital space, but like a very oversimplified and probably naive analogy is that like jet engines and, plane travel is not that different from 40 years ago. You know what I mean? We're not going twice as fast.
Yep.
Like the planes aren't like exponentially safer. I mean, but my point there is just that there's a lot of things in the physical world that don't see exponential growth. How much, in your opinion, is quantum predicated on physical qubits, right? Or like just the physical creation of these computers, which, like, by the way, are very much not like normal computers. If you go ahead and look at pictures of it, you can quickly intuit that these are not like your average, M1 Mac or whatever. So like, explain to me how much of the exponential growth do you think needs to occur in physical space versus digital space, and like where that may differ from something like AI. I'm kind of playing like pseudo devil's advocate here, if you will.
Yeah. And I think an important distinction to actually bring up here is that quantum computing is a theory of computation, and it doesn't have anything to do with physical space or anything like that. All it postulates is that we have these fundamental building blocks called qubits. And qubits are these bits, basically, that can live in a superposition of 0 and 1. It so happens that in reality, we know we can create these things from quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics has been around since the 1920s. But you can write a whole theory of quantum computing, and it can remain completely up here like pie in the sky. And it says, if you have qubits, you can do that. And that is where things like Shor's algorithm come from. That basically say, if there were these things called qubits that, held superpositions and held low enough error rates, then we could crack the keys to Satoshi's coins. The other side of that question is, okay, like, no one can disagree with that. That is a mathematically proven certainty. That is like a sound theory. Now, the question is, can we actually produce these qubits in reality? And I think this goes to your question of physical space. And can we then actually run this algorithm that we know works in theory on these physical qubits? And so in many ways, I look at it as like, we've developed the theory for the jet engine, and now we are, in the like Boeing labs trying to figure out how can we put this jet engine together, given we have the blueprint. We know that if we can get to this state, this is what happens. Now, engineers, like, you need to figure out how to do this. And along the way, I think we'll discover, like, hey, actually, maybe there are ways to improve the algorithm, or there are ways to engineer this in a way that we can solve things faster. I think the big thing is money is really flooding into this space to push this engineering challenge forward. And that is what excites me. I like seeing, like, private money being put into scientific research, because it just encourages people to pursue different architectures, like take different paths. And like, that is what is exciting to me, right? There are many different ways to build a quantum computer, and each one of those ways has many different companies exploring the best way to engineer this. Ultimately, I'm sure it's going to end up being like some combination of these in the future that, lead to quantum computing, networking, and all of these things. But I think what is very exciting is that there are so many architectural innovations being pursued on the engineering front. And that, to me, is the primordial soup you need to get this, engineering and scientific breakthrough that allows us to say, like, here it is. We've cracked like what is needed to build the first cryptographically relevant quantum computer.
Okay, you talked about that, the attention is all you need paper. What would be, if you had to hypothesize here, what would be that moment for quantum? It doesn't seem like you think we've had it, but you think that is coming, and that could be like a 0 to 1 unlock whereby the jet engine is getting built probably by many people at the same time, and there's a confluence of, innovation and go ahead.
So right now, I think one of there's two big challenges in quantum. One is, and I'm going to call it quantum engineering, like engineering a quantum computer, right? Because we've already established theoretically quantum computers work. Engineering a quantum computer, one we talked about earlier, which was this idea of error correction. So how do you get errors out of the system? And I guess the second, which is like related, but not exactly that, is this thing. It's the ratio of physical qubits needed to make a logical qubit. And so this comes with error correction, essentially. A logical qubit is a qubit that performs like the ideal qubit we theorized about. It's a thing in perfect superposition. It never has errors. Nothing ever goes wrong. And physical qubits are, subject to noise and all of these things. So the question is, how many of these physical qubits do we need to simulate one of these logical qubits? And I think what is going to happen is someone is going to come out and say, like, I have found a way to actually, right now, we think we need like 10,000 to a million like physical qubits for one logical qubit, or like crazy numbers. I think that number is going to be knocked down by multiple orders of magnitude. And I think someone is going to come out and say, I figured this out. And this is going to be the breakthrough we needed to like reduce error correction. Like the system now is producing a lot less noise because there are a lot less moving parts in it. And at the same time, I think someone is going to come out and say, I found a way to run Shor's algorithm like much more efficiently on this quantum computer. And so maybe it won't take as long and it won't take as many like revs of the cycle, like literally bit flips in order to get there. And I think those two things combined are going to put us in a place where we're like, oh, yeah, quantum computer actually looks like could be coming. Like, yeah, actually they're building it right now. And if they build this thing the way they say they're going to, yeah, they're going to be factoring, 6-digit numbers in 18 months, and in 2.5 years, like, bye-bye Satoshi's keys. And like, that is what I think is coming. And I think it's coming faster than, people are willing to price. I mean, that's the bet of our company. That's a bet of Project 11. If we're wrong, like, we're wrong. But I think I also tie it back to that idea of crypto agility. Regardless of if it's a quantum computer, if it's AGI, if it's whatever, I do think in order to survive into the future, I think current cryptography is going to need to be deprecated, changed. It's going to be broken for whatever reason. And if these blockchains are going to be these forever things, the forever machines that run forever, we're going to need ways to swap in and out of how we prove ownership in these systems. And that ownership proving mechanism needs to be robust to changes in cryptography.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's very fair. Like, regardless of how I may interpret a lot of this, I think it is very reasonable to say the risk should be, well, I honestly don't know like the degree to which it's priced in. I think that, and it's sort of naive to assume that anybody does, because the market is the market, right? And like trying to ascribe reasons for anything oftentimes is like a fool's errand. But I do think like generally what you're saying is correct. Like we might as well solve this, because if this is even, extreme like black swan or tail risk, it could decimate everything. So not like, I don't have any issue with that. One question I have, and I guess you kind of touched on this, but maybe you can even dumb this down a bit more. To somebody like myself or your average crypto holder, or just really anybody interested in tech, what is a sign, or what is some indication that we, myself and everyone else, could look out for that indicates this attention is all you need moment? Like, I think this is what I get hung up on, because to me it seems like quite binary, and it probably shouldn't be. But it's like, when do they factor 21? Like, is that something? You know what I mean? Like, is there something like that where it's like, oh, okay, this is actual progress? You mentioned the Willow chip. I've read about this, still like a little bit like unclear to me. But like, what is something in your opinion that, oh, like there we go, that's the 0 to 1?
One is papers coming out that claim they've been able to figure out either one, like huge efficiency speed ups in Shor's or other type of, these factoring hidden subgroup algorithms. Yeah. Two are papers coming out that say, I found a way to reduce the number of physical qubits we need to basically have a single logical qubit that is, sufficiently, performant by an order of magnitude, like it's a 10 to 100 factor reduction. Those are the first things I would look out for, because I think those will come. And then the second thing is, once those come, people are going to try and build them. So like step one, do people say, do physicists come out and say, hey, we've like figured out an order of magnitude improvement in one of these two areas? And two, are they able to actually build the thing and show that? And they're not going to go and build the, cryptographically relevant quantum computer first. Like they're going to build a smaller thing and test that and show that. And so you will see something factor numbers larger than 21 before you see, I think, Satoshi's keys break. Now, that is like assuming good actors and all of these things, which maybe is not always the best assumption in the quantum computing space. One of the things we haven't talked about at all is kind of like geopolitical implications.
Okay. Well, that's a great segue, actually, because this is another conversation I had with Reardon, and I am inclined to think that so much is at stake here. I mean, my understanding is that like the U.S. nuclear codes could be immediately swiped with a strong enough quantum computer. So to that end, the NSA has got to be working on this, right? Or aware of this. Why would, go ahead. Like, tell me what your thoughts are on the
finish your question, actually, and I'll ramble about this.
I guess one thought of mine. So first of all, like, okay, maybe we can assume that the Chinese and the Russians and the NSA and every other Illuminati Bilderberg group is working in stealth on this. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it is reasonable to assume that an extremely powerful quantum computer does not currently exist. Like, I think it's reasonable to assume that. But that is one thing that I've wondered with regards to the hype, especially, and maybe not so much your company, but some of the companies that are raising to build quantum computers in Silicon Valley. I've listened to a number of podcasts of the guys like who've transitioned, and it sounds very like, I'll just be honest, it sounds quite Professor Coin type stuff to me, like in crypto, where there's people working on like advanced cryptography and then they all of a sudden have a blockchain, right? Like they've left whatever. So it does sound similar, not to denigrate it by any means. But why do we expect private companies to beat governments to market when it is such high stakes, right? Like, I am very much in agreement that private innovation oftentimes is more nimble and can surpass anything that nation states or governments are capable of. With that said, this is one of those things where it seems like they would be really focused on this and pouring an immense amount of resources into it. So I guess that's my first thing is like, why don't we just wait for the NSA? Because they'll do it first, or even China. But like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is great. I love organizations, and this is a whole can of worms around that. And I think the way to frame this question is basically like, how does U.S. innovation happen versus Chinese innovation? And I think in general, U.S. innovation is much more open. It's much more like, fund people and see what happens. China is like central planning, right? And they do a very good job actually of managing like central planning plus these, like nodes of innovation that are relatively distinct. Yeah. It's not like, the heads of the CCP sit down and plan everything out. Like they do a good job of flowing it down, but it all flows back up to the top. If this happens in the US, I think it's going to happen and it'll come out and it'll be public. And I don't think the US, the NSA is not building a quantum computer because the NSA does not have the capabilities, I think, to build a quantum computer. I don't think.
But do Silicon Valley companies then? Like,
I think Silicon Valley's can't. Yeah, because like, is the NSA hiring the best physicist in the world to come and try and figure out this problem for them? Are they like? Well, we're not in World War II era. Like, let's get everyone in a room and solve this. We're not in crisis mode around this. And so I think it'd be very hard for the NSA to be like doing this and acquiring the best talent in the world in secret,
Right.
and like
Agreed.
shoving them in a room and being like, build this stuff out. China, on the other hand,
but let me
has
ask you
much
something.
better information controls.
Does that indicate that they're not overly concerned, or no?
I would say, well, I guess NIST, like the National Institute for Standards and Technologies, has said you should have a plan for post-quantum cryptography by 2030 and have deprecated all of your classical cryptography by 2035 at the latest. There are standards that NIST has approved. They're called FIPS compliant. One of them is this, it's called lattice-based cryptography. And it has been approved by NIST to be used in the government today. So if you are a government agency, you can start implementing this post-quantum cryptography in your systems. And within the government, like, this is somewhat existential. They're like, we need to start putting this in here because there's a few things. One, like, US nuclear codes could be swiped by a quantum computer. I like hope and don't think that's the case, but I think that's a good framing to think about it in that, you know, like, information that the US sends, they rely on encrypting it, and they encrypt it with RSA, and RSA can be broken by a quantum computer. And so one of the things, if I'm an enterprising nation and I want to know more about the US, one thing I can do is I can just start intercepting all of that encrypted communication coming out of the US and just shoving it in a database today. And
decrypt later.
And I can decrypt it later. So if I'm China and I want to like learn everything the US was thinking for the past 5 to 10 years, I'm snagging all this information, I'm dumping it in a database. If I build a quantum computer, I'm going to start going through it and being like, okay, this is like amazing new insight into how the US works, the way they think, what they were doing. Like, I don't know what's in there, but I'm sure it would be fascinating to learn and give you some type of competitive advantage as a nation, assuming, you know, you could do this. So this is why in the government, again, like, the government has to price this risk in that maybe like China does find a quantum computer before us. Like, okay, well, if that happens sometime soon, like, I promise you, China will use it to their advantage on the world stage. And so maybe there's a 1% chance it's in the next 5 years, but like, that's not a 1% chance that you want to be taking as the US government. Right. And so that again goes back to this like risk pricing question of like, how do we think about this? And I think the answer is like, we kind of have to take it seriously, because the moment, like, when that moment arrives, you're almost too late. Yeah. And so you need to beat that timeline, I think, to have the ideal outcome. And so now we're talking about, okay, we're going to guess about like the timeline of these changes that I think we both agreed are these kind of like step function, discontinuous or exponentially looking things. Like, when is that moment going to come? I don't know, but the ball seems to be rolling a little faster. It seems to be coming down the hill. And so there are two options. Like, say, we think it could be here, we're going to move. What's the cost? And I think that's like the other big question here. Like, what's the cost? Signatures get a lot bigger. Like, this does mess with systems. It's not a costless, like, just click the button and use new cryptography, right?
Does that mean more fees for Bitcoin?
Yeah. Honestly, Bitcoin should switch today based off where fees are at. And we can do ordinal 2.0 post-quantum. But yeah, I think like, look, there is a cost to it. This isn't free. There's no free lunch here. Quantum signatures are bigger, which, you know, means load to the system, longer signing times, more like compute all of these things. The alternative is, I don't know, like, Bitcoin's fucked and China has all of our nuclear codes, right? So at some point, I think you have to eat that cost. And the question is, when do you choose to eat that cost?
Okay, so good segue now into Bitcoin specifically. Or I guess you guys are working on cryptography in general, right? So, but let's just focus on
I love Bitcoin. I've got my Dipland t-shirt on. Like, we can.
Perfect. So to that end, what are I've been reading just in the past couple of days, like the discourse with Nick Carter back and forth with some of the core devs, Mac Rollo, and then, you know, discussing maybe the disconnect there, which is an interesting topic unto itself. What are some of the proposed ideas, and where do you think we are in those? It sounds like pretty early or maybe non-existent, but yeah, with regards to Bitcoin specifically, maybe like where are we headed?
I think there's two questions with Bitcoin. One is, what cryptography do we switch to? I actually think that is the easier question to answer. BIP360 is out there today. I know Jonas Nick and friends put out a great paper on hash-based signatures. Someone is running a Falcon testnet. Falcon's like a post-quantum signature scheme. I'm sure we'll see one with MLDSA soon too. That is like a known problem that like can be solved. I know Bitcoiners like to hem and haw over like, my node size, like, bro, like memory, like a terabyte of memory costs 2 cents. Like you can get a larger node, like whatever. There's probably some networking implications of like larger signatures. By and large, like I feel very confident that can be solved. Like we are smart, we are engineers. Other networks are going to have to solve this. This is a known this is a known problem. The second part of all of this is, what does Bitcoin do with all of the quantum vulnerable coins that are sitting out there when this upgrade happens? And that to me is the much thornier issue that is not being discussed as rigorously as this kind of cryptography side of it.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on that?
I think we have a handful of options. Actually, there's not a handful. There's probably 2 or 3. One is do nothing, right? One is say, you had Bitcoin, is in your account, it's yours forever. And if Satoshi is dead and, you made the quantum computer, like those are now your coins, right? Because you spent them. And
I will raise on that premise.
Yeah. And to be fair, I think some quantum computing companies are coming around to the idea that like, oh, there's a pretty nice, like,
bounty.
Well, it's not as large today as it was yesterday, but $500 billion bounty for having a quantum computer and taking Bitcoin, assuming that doesn't send Bitcoin's price straight to zero. That's option one, right? Is to say, okay, we're not going to do anything with these. And, if you want, you can move your keys to the post-quantum stuff. And if not, good luck out there in the dark forest. Like, hope you don't get pwned. And if you're dead, well, like your coins are now the property of whoever has a quantum computer. I don't think people love that option within the Bitcoin.
Really?
Yeah.
Understand.
I think the people that matter don't love that option. Maybe I'll like frame it that way. And the reason is it kind of kills the whole narrative that it's like your keys, your coins, right? It's no longer, that's not what the network is anymore. It's like a weird combination of bounties for quantum computers. And I think it does a lot of damage to the store of value narrative. Like, hey, it's a store of value, but it's also a honeypot for quantum computers. That doesn't sound great to me. And we have to remember that it's like, 10 to 20% of the network that is exposed to this. So like you want your store of value, that 20% is just like up for grabs that you thought was dead. It's not a great store of value. That's option one. Option two is to effectively like freeze or burn the quantum vulnerable coins after a certain date. So we say, hey, we're going to upgrade to new post-quantum signatures. You have 5 years to dig up your seed phrase that you buried on the island in the middle of the Pacific and move that to a quantum safe address. And after that point in time, the coins that are still there, like the UTXOs that sit in addresses that are exposed, will be frozen. They will become unspendable according to the rules of the network. And what that does is it basically says, we as Bitcoin have decided we're not going to provide a free bounty to the quantum computing overlords. And we want to move into an era where Bitcoin continues to secure value and secure the network, even, with quantum adversaries afoot. That one equally pisses people off because you're taking my coins that the whole premise of this was like, I could have these forever. Like, I could bury the seed phrase on the island and 80 years from now, go dig it up and it would still be my Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that one's worse personally. But it's interesting to hear you say that you think that is like slightly preferred by those who matter. The thing the conversation I had with Reardon, and I talked to people about this before. To me, it's like, okay, Cleopatra is buried with like $10 billion worth of gold, and 4,000 years later, however long, yeah, we can I'm making all this up. Maybe not Cleopatra, Tutankhamun, whoever. We can dig this up. Yeah, I'm sorry, but you didn't have guards there anymore. There's been a change of hands as to who owns this land now. We have to me, it's like, yeah, that's not really yours anymore. I'm sorry. And it was your fault for not securing it. Of course, it's not ideal, right? Because I do agree with you that it's the lesser of two evils, but it does seem like I'm very much okay with, personally, with Satoshi's coins getting stolen. And if it nukes the price, it nukes the price. That's my opinion. But why do you think that the latter is somewhat preferred? I mean, I don't know. Freezing coins seems not ideal. And I think, let it be a bounty on quantum. That is good incentive. Steal them.
Yeah. I'll also caveat this with what I think I also don't think really matters. The way I look at Bitcoin right now is Bitcoin has become somewhat institutionalized, right? We have ETFs. We have Saylor as the largest holder of Bitcoin. We have BlackRock's bell cow this past year was literally the Bitcoin ETF. We have Coinbase. And when we talk about changing Bitcoin, it's this weird, fight between, really it's a fight between nodes and economic actors. I know the devs like to think they matter, but they only matter in that they wrote the software and they can influence these other two parties. The primary economic actors today are not the primary economic actors of the SegWit era, right? They hold Bitcoin and they sell Bitcoin, and what they sell is the promise of a store of value. And I don't think that crowd is going to be thrilled with the idea that their store of value is about to get pillaged by people who are doing something completely unrelated to them. Quantum computing doesn't have anything to do with Bitcoin, and yet Bitcoin, we're saying, will and is the biggest honeypot for someone with a quantum computer, barring nuclear codes or something like that. But if you just want pure monetary outcome, it's a pretty good one.
Okay, hear me out. Hear me out.
Okay.
Extension of this point. Let me propose that by the time, so maybe my timelines are a little bit longer than yours, although I'm obviously not qualified to speak on this, but let's say that I think in 15 or 20 years is when potentially Satoshi's coins could be stolen. At that point, short-term impact, weeks, months, could be very bad. What if at that juncture, fiat is so worthless that people aren't nuking when they steal Satoshi's coins? It is money that they have just stolen, and it has very little impact on market price because we're not denominating the world in dollars anymore. I'm being facetious here, but I think there is this assumption that what's going to happen is somebody my analogy is to point out that somebody comes along, steals 1 million coins, goes and hits hyper liquid, and immediately market sells 1 million Bitcoin in one order. This, and I talked about to Reardon about this, this is probably gradual if it does occur, and maybe it's not such a huge deal. It's almost the equivalent of, it's not like when somebody steals $10 million out of a bank vault, it reduces the value of dollars, right? That was the base currency, right? Maybe that's why I'm a little bit and also I do take your point with regards to Saylor and Coinbase, and the reality is that they do have significant, like between BlackRock, Saylor, the exchanges, they have significant power when it comes to something like fork choice. If they sell on one side of a fork, that can greatly influence, right, the direction of this project. With that said, I am somewhat of the opinion, I kind of have always been like live by the sword, die by the sword with Bitcoin. Like if that ruins it, then it wasn't worthwhile. And that's one of those things where they are also incentivized to pick the right fork. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people talk about BlackRock fork, and I'm like, listen, like that's a very cagey thing, because if BlackRock fork becomes censored fork, it's not valuable at all. To me, it's worth zero, and it will go to zero. So like, there's a lot of kind of assumptions of what the incentives are, but in reality, like Saylor has to be extremely careful as to what side he chooses if something like this comes about, right? So I don't know. Yeah. Those are my not counterpoints.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I guess, to be clear, I'm talking about quantum being relevant in like this current regime of Bitcoin in the next 5 years. If it's 15 years from now, I don't know like where Bitcoin is, whatever. But I do think today, the only thing Bitcoin has realized kind of is the narrative of store of value. We have not done, Bitcoin sucks as money. Like Ethereum is better, Solana is better, fucking Hyperliquid is probably better as money. Like it's just not that is the thing it is seen as today, and that is the narrative that like keeps it alive to some extent. I think there is still like promise of these things happening, like other things happening in the future, but by and large, I think that's where we are today. I think the analogy of the bank vault is not quite right. I think the analogy is 30% of the banks in the US have vaults that, people with a gun can just walk in and take the money from. Like, I think that is the logical like way to think about this, of like, oh, I don't know that I want to keep my money in a bank anymore, because it seems like half of them are insecure. And the thing I cared about here was security. In the same way, the thing I cared about with Bitcoin was like store of value and ownership. And it was, it was digital gold. It was like better in every way. Well, you can't steal my gold bar with a quantum computer. So I feel like I'd rather have that. That is the danger I see if we do reach quantum computing in the next 5 years for Bitcoin, is like it is leading. And I love Bitcoin. I'm a Bitcoin holder. I'm like a Bitcoiner through and through. But I want to be realistic about like why it is popular and why it is like being distributive, and this is becoming a more like thing that people are being told to hold in their retirement funds. And right now it is because of this store value narrative. And my fear is that a quantum computer can, one shot that narrative and send Bitcoin back to like, fuck, we have to start again from digital cat. And like, I just, that's not going to happen. Right.
Well, I think at least, okay, so I agree with you, and I take the larger point. I will say that most of those people that you speak of, their keys are either in ETFs, they're in some way wrapped with MicroStrategy, or they're in single use already, in theory, post-quantum secure signatures, like addresses. So maybe it's the people who, like the digital cash people, the original, Silk Road people, maybe your coins get stolen, but it is what it is. I still lean that way, but I could be swayed. I need to think about it more.
Yeah. I'll come back on in 6 or 12 months. We'll see where we're at, and then we'll rehash that. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today, is like quantum poses the biggest threat to the store of value narrative. And I want to see Bitcoin continue to grow. I want to see the meme continue to propagate. I think like that happening is always a net good for Bitcoin. And what I don't want to see is that meme get killed off by quantum and cause, a big hard reset where Bitcoin now has to like redo all of this work it had done over the past, whatever it's been, 16, 18 years.
Yeah. Okay. We're like coming up on time now. We've really dug deep into this, but okay, I got a couple more questions. Bitcoin versus other blockchains. There is this one. So one of the narratives, which is probably reasonable, is that, Bitcoin's hard to upgrade and it's hard to get social consensus on anything. And I think that's generally true. And as you go down the list, it becomes probably increasingly easier to sort of aggregate around a new signature scheme or whatever, because there is slightly more top-down development. So that point is fair. With regards to this, to the actual technical redesigns, I'm not so it's not clear to me that, you know, Zcash and Ethereum and Solana are like way better off. How do you compare? Yeah. So how do you compare Bitcoin versus some of these others and like the complexities involved?
Yeah. And Bitcoin today is actually the best positioned technically to move to larger signatures and like be okay. And the main reason is like we have 10-minute block times. Our mempool is basically empty. Like, I know talking about increasing the block size is insane, but imagine we increase the block size 10x and said everyone uses these signatures that are 20x larger now. Like, I actually think Bitcoin would be just fine if like somehow we just had Groundhog's Day. You woke up tomorrow and your Bitcoin block size was 40 megabytes and signatures were larger. But otherwise, people are just still sending their Bitcoin back and forth. Like, that's okay.
Wait, I have a quick question. Does the like maybe most popular, if you will, upgrade right now include what did it mean, a 10x block size increase? Would it mean a block size increase in general?
Well, here's what it is. Like the system's throughput is based off the block size and then the minimum size of a transaction.
Right.
And the minimum size of a transaction in general, when you're like, you know, if I'm sending my coins to you, is dependent on how big my signature is in like the locking script. And the biggest factor of the size of this locking script will become this post-quantum signature, which let's say is 10 to 20x bigger than the signature today. So you can now imagine, you know, today, let's say we can fit 1,000 transactions if it's just me and you sending back and forth in a Bitcoin block. Well,
it's like 100 now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's 100 now. Okay. Like, well, they're like, okay, we don't have to change the block size.
Okay. Yeah.
Just fewer transactions can go through. If you want to keep the like same fee rate and throughput and all of that, then you probably want to increase the block size, you know, proportionally. You don't need to do that though, right? Like everyone could just yeet, you know, 200 kilobyte transactions into the mempool, and you know that's.
Wait, but another thing, I actually read something about this. I was reading this thread of somebody talking about how long and expensive it would be to migrate, but the signatures that are current, like one use signatures post SegWit, is that right? Those are, assuming you haven't reused a signature, those are secure. So you wouldn't need to move those, right? So those ones they don't need to be touched, right? It's just
they do need to be moved eventually. So I guess there's two things. One, all SegWit signatures, or I guess all SegWit keys are stored behind a hash if you've never signed from them. So it's like you have your public key and then we hash your public key. And that's what is broadcast to everyone. Hashes, unlike elliptic curve cryptography, are not susceptible to being like totally broken by quantum computers. So hashes are, as far as we know, safe from, you know, quantum computing attacks. So for as long as your public key remains behind a hash, you're safe. The thing is, when you go to spend your Bitcoin, you actually have to put the public key on chain. So when you send it into the mempool,
right,
and you sign that transaction, you're leaking your public key. What that means is, and this is a larger scale, more impressive quantum computer, is that within 10 minutes, I can
decrypt that. Yeah,
I can decrypt it and then I can spin it myself. And I guess maybe we didn't talk about this earlier, but I do think it's a fun point about quantum computing is like quantum computers don't tell you the answer when you found it. If you run a program on your computer that's like, find me this answer, eventually it stops and it says, I found the answer. Quantum computers just keep going. And then at some point you have to decide to measure them. And when you do that measurement, it gives you some answer. And depending on how long you let it run, like theoretically, the longer you let it run, the more likely it is to gonna like have arrived at that answer. But it's not immediately evident, like, at what point should I measure this? And then once you do measure it, you get whatever you get. Maybe you got the answer. Maybe you didn't get the answer. You basically have to restart the process from zero again. And so this is like, because all these things are in superpositions and we're saying they're like combinations of 0 and 1. Well, in quantum mechanics, once you measure that system, it collapses to either, 0 or 1. Okay. But in the interim, you can do all this stuff. So that's just like a fun little thing to know about.
That's fun. That's very fun.
But bringing it back to like your Bitcoin being safe, like that to me is a very low risk thing today. And I think it is a very good idea, if you care about quantum computing, to just have your Bitcoin sitting in an address that hasn't been used, and make sure it's a SegWit address or a pay script.
Can I ask something? Let me ask. Okay, when we say single use, just for like practical use for people potentially listening, let's say I buy $5,000 of Bitcoin on Coinbase and I send it to a single. I send it to a newly generated, I don't know, I use Blue Wallet sometimes. Okay, that's $5,000 sitting there. A week later, I buy $5,000 more. I send it to that same address. I'm not leaking that public key because I haven't sent it from that address, right? Okay, so that's just the pub key, right? Okay.
Yeah. All right. So you can keep sending stuff into it. It's only once you spend or sign a message that you're basically saying, here's my public key. And so.
Okay. Okay, last question, and this is just an interesting thing we were talking about beforehand. Quantum money. I read this paper, like, I don't know, 5 years ago, and I can't even recall what it was, but because it's an interesting thought experiment, I suppose, talking about quantum money, my understanding is that we wouldn't need blockchain, which is like my, utopia.
Yeah, our greatest dream. We can retire.
How does quantum money work, in theory?
Okay, yeah. In theory, the way quantum money works, it relies on this principle of quantum mechanics called the no cloning theorem. And what this basically says is that if I create a system in a certain state that no one is like, the laws of physics prevent you from copying it directly if it's in this superposition of states. And the reason actually goes back to what I was talking about with the measurement before, is that in order to actually like clone this, you need to be like, well, what information is inside? And in order to figure out what information is inside of this state, you need to measure it. And so when you measure it, it causes the system to collapse, which means, it collapses to some subset of what it was sitting out here before. And so essentially the laws of physics prevent you from counterfeiting or forging money, like this quantum money. And that was the whole point of that, is like, this is not counterfeitable. And therefore we no longer have to rely on any type of cryptography. Like, the laws of physics prevent you from stealing from your coins being stolen, basically, because in trying to do so, the thief basically ruins the system.
Interesting. Okay. So how far away are we from that?
Good question.
Never.
I have no idea. I think I like it as a kind of like endpoint vision for where this can go. Is like, ultimately, we no longer have to rely on things like proof of work or cryptography. We've now just moved on to like, this problem is solved via the laws of physics. And, you know what? If that incentivizes you to come up with a better description of the universe that merges quantum mechanics and general relativity, and now you can steal my quantum money, like that to me sounds great. Like, I would love that. But yeah, realistically, I think cryptographically relevant quantum computers definitely like step one of many on the path to ultimate quantum money. The big challenge with it, there are so many, but I think the biggest one is, how do you keep these states safe? Because you don't want them like collapsing on their own. You need to maintain this superposition. And so how do you store quantum money? I think that is one of the biggest challenges I see around it.
Don't you think that if we ever came to a future where that's feasible, it seems like Bitcoin could upgrade to that? Like, yeah, right. So, and I mean, that's the kind of interesting thing. Maybe that's like like you said, like the idealized vision of it all. But a lot of people think that Bitcoin is just like incapable of change. And in some ways, this stems from like Satoshi. I mean, I don't know if people, I think there's this quote from Satoshi where he basically said, and I don't know if it was a back and forth or it was like one of his emails or what, but he said like developers of Bitcoin should be seen more as maintainers versus developers going forward. And maybe it was Greg Maxwell. Anyways, this was like very early on that the ideas of ossification and like being very hard to change have been rooted in Bitcoin. So, but I mean, if we get like quantum money, I think that people would come around. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
So I don't know.
It's like perfectly private digital cash is what quantum money is in its idealized state.
Like, we should work on that. Who's working on this?
Yeah, we're working on it, but it's a little further down the roadmap. I think let's make sure we can get that quantum computer up and running first, and then after that, I'm all about how we can move over to quantum money because I think it's just fascinating. And frankly, when we get the quantum computer running, I think we're going to just enter a new scientific paradigm and have, like crazy new discoveries. I know we've been talking about blockchain, but like if we want to be futurist about it, like there's so much you'll be able to do with like chemistry, biology, all of these things.
Post scarcity, it won't even matter.
Yeah, exactly. That like, I don't know what humanity will look like 10 years after we have like a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, but I suspect it will be vastly different from what we imagine today.
Okay, wait. Final thing, because I have to ask you, like, give me some timelines. Give me something concrete. When do you think we get a full-fledged quantum computer? Like, are you in the 5-year, 10-year? Like, where are you placing your bets?
I need to go start the poly market. It's not there.
I know.
Satoshi's coins move by 2030. I think that is just like an amazing. I want that.
What do you think is what do you think is fair value for that?
I think I give it like I'm like bullish on this, and I'd say probably like 20% chance.
Okay. I think that's roughly what it is on Kalshi. Actually, there is one on Kalshi.
Oh, there is. Okay.
It has like no volume though, so I don't.
Okay. Yeah. I need to go like drive volume to this.
We should. I will text Shane. I will talk to Shane and ask him about putting one up. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that.
This sounds like a good use of our Series A. So
yeah. So 2030, and then like when are you certain by 2040 or something like that? There's different levels of conviction.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. By 2040, if we haven't figured it out, like that's gonna be rough. So I don't know. Like my level of conviction is like 2030 seems like a really good shot. 2035, like pretty dang sure we're gonna be cooking something on quantum computers by that point.
Okay.
If we're not by 2040, like, well, hopefully I found a new job because got to pay the bills somehow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe also I can have you back on in 6 months or a year. We can talk about what you guys are doing, and then maybe we'll have seen some attention is all you need type moment by then. But yeah, I really appreciate it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I always love coming on and chatting with you. So let's do it. In 6 or 12 months, I'll text you when the paper comes out, and then you can have me back on.
I'll start freaking out.
Yeah,
all sounds right, thank good. You, Tyler.
All right, see ya.